now we're going to go a little bit more in depth in this whole configuration. Remember that this configuration is an example that we put together for the Conectaton, but which has been thought of as something that can be reproduced, as something that you can implement in your own systems. So it's like a model that you can use as a benchmark when you design your own terminology services. So we're going to go back to on some of the details, fire, local terminologies, etc. So as we had said, this is all based in the fire terminology module. Now, each system used to have a table where they stored the code systems that they used, more than one table, and some had more flexible systems and said which kind of terminology you actually had. If it's A or B, it discriminated that, and it had several terminologies, and that is totally different to the information that could have been loaded in there. It's a code, basically, and that the terminology. But as terminologies become more complex, they include synonyms and parents and children and other attributes, it becomes more complex to have it in a standardized presentation. So each system had a little bit of a different table. Some had it in columns, or other used several columns or several tables, which means that the terminology in all clinical systems is managed differently. And anything that needs to be done has to be thought about that system in particular. You have to add a new terminology, or if you need to search for something, it's all got to be from zero, but for that system in particular. So just like fire helps to standardize the way in which we communicate with these common resources that we have, in that part of the communication, codes are also very important. So there's a whole standardization module on how to understand the codes. When we get a code, what terminology, why we get it, what text, what descriptions, what attributes it has, which means that if we start defining codes in a more standardized way, if we all define the code systems and terminology in one given way, we can start thinking about going from fire into our systems using these methodologies that simplify access to terminology, classifications, clinical records, etc. This goes from ICD 10 all the way to ICD 11, LOINC, SNOMED. You may remember all of them can be represented like this. Some have already been represented and others not yet. ICD-10 is ready, ICD-11 is in the process, SNOMED is ready. I mean, it's a pathway where that we're all going to get there. So this is just a summary. What is that abstract model of what is a fire terminology that the systems can start to include? It's basically a code system. A terminology is a code system. SNOMED is a code system. LOINC is a code system. So when SNOMED has a national version, these are concepts that are different versions, so as to speak. So Argentina has a code system which is different to the one from Uruguay, which differs to the one from the United States. And when you need to refer to parts of that terminology, then you talk about value sets, which is what is used to be called subsets. Uh, all the medical processes are. So when you need to talk about different, a link between different terminologies, that is called a concept map. So this is like a super abstraction. If you want to have a dynamic system, and you want to search operations, mapping, and all of that, these are the three resources. With these three resources, then we have the capability of representing this. If we look inside, we can see that they are extensible, and that's the nice part of it. So when we implement, a good practice is to try and use these standard representations because terminologies will easily be available. We have to think how we don't have to think about how to include that within our systems. We can simply refer to a standardized server. So Servers, terminology servers, as we saw in the previous webinar, are applications that are specialized in these three resources: code systems, value sets, and concept maps. It's an application that is run on a database that is stores all the terminology and allows any systems to interact with those classifications, with those terminologies, using code systems, value sets, or concept maps. So that can be used in many different situations. So for example, when we create a standard version, which is the one goes from the arrow that goes from the EHR to the standard file resources, we can use that then for many different things. For example, the initial data that the doctor uploads as they are typing that text to select the code that is more similar to his diagnosis is real-time consultation with the terminology server. So it's basically a value set, trying to find the most similar ones. And when it's a ICD-10 or SNOW meta terminology, when creating that standard terminology, the implementation guide might allow me to use additional terminologies to the ones that I'm using. So there we can communicate and we can say, allow us or help me to convert this into that. And the terminology server will run all of that information. So within the EHR, we do not need to save the codes. I mean, the codes that the doctor chooses, but not the whole list of possible codes. That method, in order to do the mapping, to find the mapping, to search, all of that is done by the terminology server. That's the advantage. And when we interpret back again, the same thing happens. When we create the FHIR resource, then we're going to see the implementation guides, which will tell us the restrictions. For this field, we have to use a such and such code system or code set. And that's what these are, the terminology bindings. All the implementation guides tell us what code we can put into what field, and that's quite dynamic. Now, for this example, which this is the vaccination, but it also has the IPS, which goes through all the different parts of health. So we have concentrated here on some things. We're going to define some subsets in order to cover some parts of the IPS, and we're going to try and demonstrate with these subsets how it works. So let's assume that let's create a virtual terminology, which is not actually going to be used, but this is just for like the backbone that we're going to be working with. So let us say that for background information, we're going to have these. These will be the diagnosis. This will be the vaccinations. These are the allergies, and these are the medications. It could be that this year we might update allergies. We will add some additional codes, but these are only as a means of example. So when you look at it like this, it seems quite interesting, but we are missing that it's actually FHIR. We've been talking about FHIR, but now we can see that we have created Excel tables, but they're very comfortable to work with and also to change, to modify all of our data in order to understand how this works. So part of what we're going to be seeing today is this transformation process of tables to FHIR resources and how those FHIR resources will go to the terminology server. In the following webinar, we will see how we use the terminology server in order to explore the data that has been loaded. So basically, these Excels cannot be put into the terminology server. The server is SNOMED, which is standard FHIR, just ordinary, that has advanced enablers, but Happy also works, only that the Snowstorm is a lot quicker. It's a consultation language that it uses. It's more specialized in FHIR, and it has all the basic things that as the terminology server has. And there are many others. The API and Happy are open source, and then there are other off-the-shelf that you can buy. But the important thing is that these open source servers, if they use the same Fire interface, then you can use them interchangeably without any issues. So if we need to load a lot of terminology and I need to have someone specialized, that snowstorm server, for example, can be used if they use the same API Fire, or we're using a commercial one, but it's a very expensive and we want to go to Snowstorm, which is for free, they can do that. Maybe it's not SnowMed, then we can take Snowstorm out and we can use Happy. So it all works the same without changing the code because the API, the API REST are the same ones, unless you have some advanced SnowMed things for which you might need a specialized server. So what we're going to do is we're going to load, we're going to upload these value sets and the mapping as a concept map in order to use the translate operation. So we can go from these things. For example, this code is mapped to this code. We're going to convert it into Fire, and from Fire, we put it in Snowstorm with post, and we're going to do a translate operation.
tablas que creamos. No las
How do
podemos
these tables actually work? I can show you a table. But the idea is that the first sheet has the root of the local code system. As you know, all the Fire resources are identified with the URIs. They don't have OIDs, and they don't have UIDs either that are generated automatically. They have URIs because they are more familiar for human use. They can be shared, they can be saved. We can save two value sets in two independent servers. We can use the same URI, and it's an operation that will help us into finding the same value set. So that's the advantage of URI. So for everything that we're going to create code systems, value sets, and concept maps. So we need URI those. And the URIs will be automatically created, with the exception that we're going to create a root. It's got to be one country root. So in the example here, we have nodex.org/terminology. You could put there something like a Ministry of Health dot Argentina slash terminology, for example, or anything you want. Is having a root there, and that might seem like a URL, but it's not. It's not that. URIs are like a URL, but they're not. But the URL is universal resource locator, and this is a universal resource identifier. So if this goes to the value set, then it would be wonderful. And they use it as a router within the domain so that you can see the value set. But no one's actually going to put this and to paste it in a browser. That's not what it's done for. It's to identify the resource. It's an identifier. So you can use the URI that you want. It's the country URI. They're going to be called like this. And then the process will add a bar value set and the name in order to give it unique values to all the resources that are created. And here we can see the other sheets: diagnosis, vaccinations, allergies, medications, and procedures. These are the sheets that have to do with the IPS sections. Vaccinations is also used for the other track, for the vaccination certificate, immunization certificate. So what are the columns here? We have these first ones, which is the code, as if it was the Raxel code. We all start with that just in order to agree we have invented this list of code, which is our pattern for the exercise. It has no real practical utility, but it's just for us to guide us in doing this mapping. The important thing is from local code on. Local code is if you have in your country a local code that is equivalent to the standardized Raxel code for diabetes mellitus, which is we have named as H1 or whatever, PH4H. This is just the name that we have given it. So if you have a concept like this and you're using it, if you would like, every time that that code is used within your system, you can find it with the standard local code and establish that mapping, then you put it here. This is your local code. For example, as an example here, it's called L1. And then for H2, we've said L2, L3, L4. And this is the term that you already have. You don't have to invent them or make them up. And if you have nothing, you can leave it as is. No problem, no issues. You can even leave it blank. So if you use ICD-10, you're not going to have local terms. And that's okay. That means that there's no local code system and that no value sets or mapping locally are made. So you could ignore that. And then we have the standard codes. In each of these tabs, following the recommendations from the implementation guides, there is a code system and a value set that is recommended to represent data. For example, for diagnosis, ICD-10 and, and SNOMED or SNOMED optionally. So in order to do that, what we do is that for each of these diseases that have been selected for the project, we have the ICD term and we have the SNOMED code. And we give you that. That's ready. It's being done. We've done the manual mapping of these where we have selected this code. And this will allow you for the following. Let's suppose that when this is transformed into a file resource in order to be able to navigate between the columns, you will have L2 in your local system. You know that's M46, which is 4405, 4006 in SNOMED. And if you have this SNOMED code locally, you're automatically going to know that this is the ICD-10 code. And that works both ways, because just like when you have the local codes, you can select the ICD-10 or the SNOMED code in order to send it within the IPS so that everyone can understand it, because if it's called L2, nobody would understand. Also, when we receive the information, the same thing happens, because we're not going to be getting L17. We're going to get M61 or this code here, 56671, etc. So when you want to see how to incorporate that data in my system so that it's equally codified with the rest of the systems in the system, we interpret the map in the other direction, going from SNOMED to local or from ICD-10 to local. And that's the objective. And the same thing happens with each of the different tabs. You can, let me go, for example, to the Excel sheet, this one. And you can see that it's the exact same table. You could change that as I have told you, and these are the local codes that you could change if you have them. When you go to diagnosis, same thing. When you go to vaccination, the exact same thing, vaccination local codes. And now look at the difference. Diagnosis and background information is the same thing, but with vaccination is different. It has ICD-11 and SNOMED. And when you go to allergies, you only use SNOMED. That's the way it's being defined. Medication only SNOMED, procedures only SNOMED. This is the standardized language. That's what the implementation says. And each of them, or what these tables do, is to allow you to modify this local column, which means that if you want to follow this model for a real project in the future, you're going to have to do the exact same thing, but for everything in the vocabulary. If it's a real project in the future for interoperability, then these Excel codes will not exist. But that's not important. It's what you actually have. The objective of these codes is simply to identify this subset. So you're going to have a standardized vocabulary, ICD-10, SNOMED, ICD-11, and you will have local codes that you're using. You might have them, you might not. And if you do have them, then you have to do this. You have to do the mapping, the local terms with the term of each classification. And there are different tools that can be used for this. So I want to show you the process of the implementation process.
Entonces, a ver, vamos a ver cómo les puedo mostrar eso. Sí, acá, vamos a hacer así. Esto es
Okay, so this
un cursor, ¿sí? Esto es una interfase de desarrollo que tiene
This
este
is the
script,
development
este
interface that
documento
has
del
this script. This
archivo.php.
script is part of the files that
Y
you have
dice
received.
Raxel
It's a
convert
script which is
XLS
called
to Fire.
Raxel convert
Este
XLS to
es un
Fire.
script que lo pueden leer, es completamente open source.
You can
Lo
read it. I
pueden
mean, this is totally
leer
open
con
source. You
instrucciones de
can take a
poder
look at it.
paso
And
por
what it
paso,
does is it goes
para cada ficha
around
va
the
tomando
table
decisiones
tab
para
by
crear
tab, and it
el
makes the
recurso que uno
decision
necesita.
in order to create the
Entonces está
resources
cargando
that
los
you need.
datos,
So
está
here it's
leyendo los datos,
loading the
está
data, it's
sacando las fuentes de
retrieving it,
referencia
it's getting the
para poder
mapping
sacar
in
la
one
dirección
direction and
para
in
la
the
zona
other
donde la
direction
Raxel
too. We're
internamente
going
está
to have from
haciendo
local
todos
to
los
Raxel,
mapeos
from
y luego
local to
empieza a crear todo
SNOMED,
ese
and then
antiguo
it starts creating
y empieza a
all
hacer
the
una segregación
files
de
that
los
it's
libros
going
y
to
todo eso.
include. And so
Y
it's
acá está todo
carrying out all of
este
these
documento
operations,
que
and
es
here is
con un
creating a
índice de archivos.
manifest, which is an index
Y
of files,
todo esto empieza a
somehow like
procesar
that,
según
and it's
este
putting
Fire.
all of these files within a
Entonces
Fire
necesita la
package,
validación que lo que contiene
which
es toda esta información.
contains all of this information.
Y todo esto, esperen,
And
un
all
segundo.
of this
Ahí está. Todo esto es una operación que se ejecuta
is one
automáticamente
operation which is
y está
automatically
cargando los otros
executed.
archivos y
And
todo.
here it's
Todo
adding
esto
all the other files. So
lo
when you run
terminamos
this,
cuando yo
once it
se lo
stops
termino de
running,
trabajar.
really, I run it here at the bottom and I can run it again.
Python 3.
So if I
También
put here
por ahí
Python
en
3, I
Python
know that it's very
agarro el
small at the
archivo
bottom, but we run
XLS que estoy
that
sacando
and
de
I
la
point it
computadora
to my Excel sheet.
digamos que
I can
y ya
clean it
está.
here.
Ya
It
creamos este
automatically
file.
runs, and that's it. It's
Y si
created
cae
the Fire
package, yo
package.
veo
And that Fire
el
package, if I
contenido
take a look at it,
más
will have
relevante.
the
¿Sí?
content that we saw
Va a
before.
tener este
That is to
contenido.
say,
Y
it'll
el
have
resultado de
this
leer esa
content.
tabla
And the
va a
result
traer
of
code
reading
system,
that
va a traer
table
concepts.
is
Y al traer
bringing code
conceptos
systems, value
implica
sets,
crear
and concept
39
mass
distintos files.
implies creating 39
Por lo tanto,
file
va a crear 4 code
resources.
systems.
It will create four code systems. Snowmed
Hemos
doesn't have to
mostrado
create
aquí
them
en
because we
Snowmed
started
cómo
from
se hacen
Snowstorm, which already has Snowmed. We
Entonces
don't need to
crea
create
un
it.
índice de
But it
10
does have to
instantes.
create an
No
ICD-10,
crea
which is
todo
not
el
part of
índice, crea solamente
Snowstorm,
un
and it
ICD
doesn't
que
create it
se
all,
muestra en el
only the
tab.
ICD that has the
Podríamos poner
concepts
los
that are in
ICDs
the
acá.
table. We could have a
Pero
full
para
one
ejemplo
or
vamos a
not.
hacer esto.
So for the example,
Crea un
we've
code
based it
system
only on the
ICD 11.
table.
Acá no
ICD
tiene conceptos
11
para
too,
crear, pero
which is not
creamos un code
available
system para que
either,
sea
but
útil.
with the concept that we
Un
have
code
in
system local.
vaccinations, for example.
Entonces
Also,
tiene
a local code
para
systems.
ejemplo,
You have
decirle,
different codes
este
for
code
different
system
things, and it
local
says this is the
tiene
local code
todo
system that has all
y
the codes.
crea el code
And
system
it
de
has
referencia para
the
eso.
reference Raxel
Esto
code
sigue, como
system
se llama,
too.
son fragmentos.
ICD-10
Están
and
ubicados
ICD-11
en
are
este code system.
fragments. They have been
Y crea
highlighted as
23 value
fragments.
sets.
Then it
Así
creates
son 23.
23 value
Porque
sets.
crea
Why 23?
listas completas para cada
Full
uno de ellos.
lists
Si un value
for
set
each
es
of
igual
them. That is to say, a
al
value
lista
set that is the same
ICD-10
as
de
everything that's
fragmentos,
within
también igual a
ICD-10,
lista ICD-11.
another one for
Antecedentes,
ICD-11, so on and so
por
forth.
dominio.
And then it creates a
Dicen algunos
subset
value
by
sets para
domain
antecedentes
to,
personales, ICD-10, otros
for
para
personal information.
diagnósticos,
Another one
ICD-10,
for diagnosis,
antecedentes.
ICD-10, another one for
Va por cada una de las
procedures. For
solapas
SNOMED,
y
goes
va
through
creando.
each
Después
one
se
of the
crea
tabs
otro
and it creates them.
ICD-10
It also
para
creates one for
alergias,
local, for
para
allergies, for
dermatología.
vaccinations,
Y
one by one.
empieza a crear los concept
And
match.
then it
Empieza
starts
ahí ese
creating
resultado.
the concepts match, which are
El
in
concept match
two directions.
es el que
There's
va
one that
creando
already exists, which is the one that goes from
entonces acá
SNOMED to
creado, ya
ICD-10.
tiene un código
That's
ese
already
código
created.
no
And
falla.
if you have
Tiene que
that,
volver a
then you
crear.
use the standard
¿Qué es
mapping.
lo
You
que
don't need
cuesta?
to
Tiene que crear
recreate it, but the
fuerzas
reds
que
do need to be created.
de
So
SNOMED
we
al
have to go
local,
from
ICD-10
SNOMED
al
to
local,
local, from
ICD-10
ICD-10
al
to
local,
local, ICD-11 to
Raxel al
local,
local,
and from
y
Praxel
así se va
to
creando.
local,
Y
and so
terminan
on and so forth.
en
And that ends up
12,
creating 12
12
different
value sets. Y todo
concept
eso son
maps.
39
And
resources.
these are then 39
Después
file
lo tienen el nodo.
resources. So when you have the
El nodo
node,
tiene un
you will
navegador
see that
SNOMED,
you have the
tiene el
SNOMED
amplifier,
browser,
tiene
the Fire API,
el
and
Swagger,
the Swagger that we
que
have
vamos a ver
created
cómo se
for the
utiliza.
Connectathon that we will see next
El
week.
Swagger es como una interfase que lo
A
que hace es,
Swagger is like an
una vez
interface. So
que tenemos esos
once that
archivos
we
creados,
have all of
el
those
zip file,
files
como sería
created, that zip,
el disco,
I will show you
es
what it
este.
looks like.
¿Sí?
I think it's this one.
Cuando uno termina de correr, este es el
When you
archivo de
create,
Excel.
this is the
Este
Excel
es el
file,
Python y
this is the
genera este
Python,
code
and
system.
it creates this
Y acá
TGZ.
puedo hacer doble clic y me
And
abre este
you
paquete.
can double click it and it
Dentro de este hay
opens up
hay un
this
package.
package,
Un
and
package
inside it's a
tiene
package, and it
un,
has
un JSON que
a
tiene
JSON
un índice de todos los
which
consigo
has an
ese tipo
index
de
to
visualización.
all the files and
Ahora
tells
vamos
you
a
what
generar
type of
dos
resources
subgrupos
they
de
are. And here in code
referencias
system, we have
ICD-10
the one for
local
ICD-10,
para
ICD-11, local, and
ICD-10
Rexel.
y después vemos que en value
SNOMED
set
already
tenemos 39
existed, and in
value set
value
que
set,
habíamos
we have the
hablado
39 value sets that we talked
por
about
dominio y
by domain
terminología.
and
En
terminology.
39 tenemos
And we
los
have
libros de
also
base de datos,
the
tenemos los
concept
libros
map.
39 y
We have the ones that I have mentioned before,
esta es
as you
una
can see
versión un
here.
poco
So it's like
extrema
an
de hacer
extreme
la
version of
realidad,
what
por
one
ejemplo,
would have to do in
quiero
reality.
encarar este
If
tipo
you
de
want
implementación en realidad
to
chica.
do
Quizás
this
en un
kind of
estándar
terminology
puede
implementation that is
aprovechar
based on
la
standard and
versatilidad
take
de la
advantage of
tecnología
the
y
versatility,
crear este tipo de
then
recursos
we need to
para
create these
desarrollar.
kind of resources and
Después,
you
lo
need
que
to
uno hace
upload it
después
into the
es
server.
ponerlo
So
en
what
proceso,
we do afterwards is
que
to
es
put it in the
ejecutar
server, is to
estos
run
comandos
it,
que vemos acá.
to execute these
Cierro,
commands that you have here,
genero la convención
convert
y
it,
luego hago este
and
curl,
then
que lo
we
que hace es
do this curl, which
sobre
makes a post over
server
the
fire. Y así
Fire
vemos cómo se
server.
ve el servidor
And
en
I can
Docker.
show you what it looks like in Docker.
Está.
Hold on, where's Docker? Here.
Yo instalé ahora un snowstorm para hacer la
I
prueba, pero
just
Docker es muy
installed a
fácil de
snowstorm
manejar,
for
de
this
poner
test, and the
cómo
Docker
hacerlo.
is very easy. This is the explanation on
Es
how
muy
to
fácil
do
de
it,
acceder,
and it's actually
es
easier for
facilito
you
y
that
funciona
you can
súper
actually
rápido.
see it.
Snowstorm empieza a
And
cargar
this
los
is the
datos
part where Snowstorm starts
de
downloading the data
la versión de Snowmed. Tarda como
from the SNOMED version,
en
and it takes
arrancar
about
esto
20 minutes in
del
doing
server.
so,
Y al
a little
final,
more
la
maybe.
sección de los
And in
ICD
the
es la
end,
sección de los value set.
we have the value
Acá
set
le
operations.
hice
This
la
is
operación que
where
es
I asked it
importar estos
to
value sets.
say import
¿Ven?
these value
Acá había
sets.
terminado y
It had
después cuando
finished
importaba
here,
los
and
recursos
here it
fire,
says importing
acá
the fire
importaba cada uno
resources, and it
de los
imports
que
each
estábamos
of
viendo.
these, which were the ones that we
Entonces,
were looking
cuando
at.
uno hace todo
So
esto,
when you do
termina
all of this,
un
then
snowstorm
you end up with a
con value set.
snowstorm
Yo
that has
puedo
the contents of the value sets. So
verlo desde la...
you can
Ustedes pueden ir
you
a la
can
parte de Fire
go to
y van a
Fire,
encontrar
and you
una página así,
will find a
donde van a
page
poder ver
like
los
this
value
one,
set, ver los
where you'll be
concepts,
able
las
to see
expansiones,
the value sets,
hacer
code
las
systems,
traducciones
concept maps,
y
do the
hacer la
translation
visualización.
or the
¿Sí?
expansions, but also do the lookouts.
¿Cómo lo van a usar esto? Si
So
quieren
how
meterse
will
en
this be
Postman, yo
used? I
puse
mean,
acá el
before that, I
Postman
can show
en
you
el
what it looks
navegador
like in my Postman
y
so that you can see that it's
primero
uploaded,
cómo se usa.
and then I will show you
Acá
how it
este es el
is
Postman
used.
y acá el
This is
Postman
the
es,
Postman, and here
por ejemplo, está apuntando a mi
it's
snowstorm local, yo
pointing
acabo de ver
towards my local snowstorm
y
that I just run,
veo qué value sets
and
hay y
we
acá
can
están
see
todos.
which value sets I have,
Entonces
and you can
yo
see them all
agarro
here. This is
la
the
URL,
identifier of the value
esta es
set
la
with the
location, este es
URL, which is location, and
el
this is the
corte. Este es
ID.
el local de
So
alergias.
this is
Este es
local
el
for
diagnosis.
allergies. This is
Entonces, y así
diagnosis,
sucesivamente yo voy
and
pasando
so
por
on
todos
and
estos
so forth. I can go
dispositivos de
through each and every
vacunación.
single one of them.
Yo puedo entrar acá y ver
Vaccinations.
qué value set de
I can
vacuna
click here and see the
identificar.
vaccination
Acá
value
están todos
sets,
los códigos.
and here are all the
Cada uno de
codes.
ellos tiene toda la
Each
información
of
que
them has all the information that we need
y lo
in order
mismo
to
con los concept
to
maps
represent them. And the
para
same thing for the
para las
concept maps
terminologías.
and for the full
Entonces,
terminologies also.
¿cuál es el objetivo de todo esto?
So
Un poco
the
empezar a usar
objective
el
of
servidor
this is to start using the server
para generar
in order
los
to
documentos
generate
estandarizados.
the standardized
Entonces,
documents.
sabemos que tenemos que
So
usar
we
todos
know
los value sets.
that we have to
Una
use all
opción
the value
es
sets.
que
And
ustedes
one
lo usen para
option
entrada de datos.
is
Si
that
van
you
a
use them
Conectaton,
for
por ahí
data
tienen sus
entry.
datos que ya están
In the
creados
Conectaton, you might
con
have
las
data
tareas
that
que
have
uno
already
puede
been
definir
created
para
and you want
realizar.
to enter them
Pero
into the
ellos muchas
standardized
veces simular la
resources.
entrada de
Or
datos.
maybe you want to
Puedan
simulate that
saber que
entry.
acá hay un
So I will
antecedente,
allow
acá
the
hay un local de
doctor to
diagnóstico, acá hay un
upload
local de
a
alergia. Y
diagnosis
cada
and a
uno de ellos lo
vaccination.
simulaban en realidad
And if you are going to
utilizando
simulate, then
terminología
the
para
data
cargar
entry, you
datos
could
y
use the
utilizar los value
terminology
sets para
server,
realizar la
or you
carga de
could
datos.
use these value sets also.
Entonces, como les decíamos, una
So
vez que
as
están
I was
todos cargados,
saying,
tienen que ver
once
cómo,
you have the data
cómo
loaded,
es el
you're
binding.
going to have to see
Por
what the
ejemplo, pueden
binding is like. For example,
usar los mapeos.
using
Diagnóstico
the
lo pueden hacer
mapping a
para
local
traducir
diagnosis to
una
ICD-10 in order to
URL
send out an ICD-10 if that's
mandando
required,
un
or
código de Snowmed
sending a
identificado en
SNOMED
Snowmed
code. If you
para
have a
transformarlo a
SNOMED code,
ICD-10
transform it
con los
correctly
datos
into
requeridos.
ICD-10.
Y también puede ser que ustedes
And
decidan agregar
also,
bindings
you
adicionales.
might want to add
Entonces,
additional bindings
es obligatorio mandar CIE10,
because
más los
it
bindings
might be mandatory, but like we can also
y lo
send
que
a
se
SNOMED.
necesita.
So we have
Entonces,
that
Fire te permite
Remember that FHIR allows you to send out different codes for the same entity. So you could have a local, and using this, I use the ICD-10, and here also SNOMED. Or if I've got an ICD-10, we don't need to do anything for the preferred binding, but I can use it here in order to send this code. In the case of vaccinations, local codes can be translated into ICD-10. If we have SNOMED, also into ICD-11. Medication, local procedures can be turned into SNOMED. But when you receive, also if you simulate that you are receiving fire resource, let's say an IPS, you might only simulate, for example, that you can deploy it on the screen, or maybe including part of that document as part of the electronic health record. So in general, someone needs to validate that. This diagnosis, I want to input it into the list of diagnosis or vaccinations. And your system will ask you then to go into the local code. So when you use the local codes here, you can use these concept maps, these translate against in order to convert from the local codes that you are receiving to the local codes that then you can save into your system, and which will keep a homogeneity with the way that it's being loaded into your system. So I apologize with this date. The next workshop will be next week on the 31st, right? Let me change that. July 31st, 2025. And I think it's what, 1400 hours, 1500 hours Eastern time. So the next steps are, based on this, you have to start working in the local code mappings, using the Excel sheet, putting the local codes in the columns that you need to try to run also the conversion with a Python system in order to create a package that you try also to insert the package within the snowstorm and having the file resources available. And if you do that several times, it's not a problem, because they are persistent. If you put snowstorm again, a second version of a value set or a second version of a code system, it replaces the previous one. So it's not an issue. You're not breaking anything up. Remember first to define well the URI, because that's part of the identifier. And if you change that, then you're going to duplicate that different value sets with different URIs. And you can start playing around with the API to see how it works. Next time around, we're going to see some concrete examples of transformation and all the parameters with the swagger that we have prepared. And also the idea for next time, if any of you have any issues, I mean, if you're working with monitors, they will help you out. But if you get to the next workshop and you have problems that you have not been able to solve, we can address them here, and we can work together so that we can understand what's going on. So that was the content for today, and I'm willing to answer questions.
¿No hay preguntas? ¿Alguna pregunta? Any questions?
Are there any questions?
Adriana tiene preguntas. Adelante.
Adriana has a question. Adriana, please.
Gracias, buenas tardes a todos.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. The tables that you showed us today, Alejandro, do they have the same information from last year? Is it the same tables, or do we have to make new ones? If the system has not changed, if you use the same systems, then you can use the same tables. I have news in that regard. For the exercise that we're doing now, and in order for us to catch up with the milestones related to 2024, which has to do with the terminology transactions, you can use the tables that were used in the previous years. And if you have new inclusions, then you can take advantage of that. But for the vaccination certificate, we do have a webinar planned for the next month because there are some subtle changes, but the most important of which has to do with the vaccination codes. Last year, we used ICD-11, and this year, the definition I'm thinking about going into production, especially related to yellow fever, it uses a pre-qualified code from the WHO. There's a small subset available in the implementation guide now, and we have been requesting the full list that we understand is not part of that guide, and that will have to be uploaded into this table, and we need to update it. But I hope that we'll be able to align that with the webinar that we have dedicated for ICDD, and where we're going to be showing you some of these new aspects in the implementation guide. It would not be difficult to add it here. In this case, we're already using the two columns that were predefined. And if we have to use three, I mean, if it changes the ICD-11, it's very easy. If it's a third one, then we need to change the script a little bit so that it knows that it has three columns. It'll be one additional step, but it's not really complex. Yes, I understand that it would not be the ICD-11. It would the ICD-11 code. It will be a WHO code. So we may have to change either the script because the ICD-11 code will no longer be used. And then we can replace it then. And we could also put ICD-11 at the end and here putting the new code. And we would need to change the script for it to learn the URI for that new terminology. But it's not complicated. Yeah, but that's basically the big change. It would not be the ICD-11 code. It would be the WHO code. Yeah, that's what it would be. Are there any additional doubts? Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Alejandro, for clarifying that. We still have a few minutes for some additional questions. In the meantime, let me tell you that next Thursday, we have the next and last session regarding terminology. Well, it seems like everything was very clear. Yes, and next week, as I mean, you've seen this, you saw this last year. So next week, maybe you can also bring about any questions, any doubts, if you've tried it and things that did not work, or if what things that you like, things that you didn't like, so we can always use that session to talk about these, to get some feedback. So that you can then use the same technique for your own projects. Well, yes, and several countries have already executed some mapping in the previous month. So we're going to have to work on this whole vaccination thing that I have just mentioned, but it'll come about. It's not managed by us, it's done by the WHO. Anyway, then, if there are then no further questions, Alejandro, I think that we can close today's session. No more hands are up. So thank you, everybody. There are no doubts in the chat pod either. So thank you. Thank you so much for having come. Remember that this will be available for those who will participate in the Conectathon. And the idea is that you can continue working on the terminology with your monitors, and you may bring about some doubts that you come across next week. Run the script, carry out the transactions so that when we need to include a new subset, it can be done easier, and it's only about executing something that you're already acquainted with. The idea is to come to the Conectaton with the best possible knowledge, and we are starting in this second pre-Conectaton phase with some new aspects like the app and obviously the terminology and vaccination certificates. So without further ado, then thank you so much, and we will see you next week, same time again. Have a good Friday, a good weekend to see you.
Chao. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Saludos a todos.
Saludos a todos.